Do allow them to take land.
No.
You do allow them to take land.
Nobody can
and then
take
when
land.
they take the land, they kill the white farmer.
Daily Mad News. Mad News. Daily Mad News. Mad News. Daily Mad News.
Welcome, ladies and gentlemen. Welcome to today's episode of the Daily Mad News with your host, Efo Pizzo, coming to you live and direct from the Mad News headquarters right there in London. So, what is the Mad News for today?
Daily Mad News.
A check on Trump's first claim about white genocide in South Africa. That's an article by the Reuters on the 23rd of May 2025.
Daily Mad News.
Donald Trump repeated unfounded conspiracies of white farmer genocide in South Africa to the leader of South Africa. The US president played a video and showed newspaper clippings to try and back up his allegations.
You do allow them to take land.
No.
You do allow them to take land.
Nobody can
and then
take
when
land.
they take the land, they kill the white farmer.
Daily Mad News.
South Africa and the US have been at loggerheads since Pretoria passed the expropriation law in January 2025. The legislation seeks to redress years of unequal land ownership by allowing the state to expropriate land for public purposes, including housing and infrastructure, if deemed in public interest. Landowners are particularly concerned about the law, which has divided South Africans on whether the expropriation law will really bring prosperity to South Africa.
Daily Mad News.
Today's episode is a very sensitive episode. It is very racial and controversial, and is one of the hurdles which we have to cross in order for us to be able to understand what's going on, both historically and what's happening now, so we can understand how to address the situations we found ourselves in this day and age. So grab yourself a coffee and some snacks, because this is going to be a very long, uncomfortable history down memory lane.
Daily Mad News.
This strip in Cape Town, South Africa, divides the beachside community of Strand from the township of Nomzamo. They're only a few meters apart, but the people on each side live very different lives. Strand has backyards and driveways. Nomzamo is much more dense, and the people here have fewer basic services. Less piped water, less internet access, and Nomzamo is majority black. And this is the case across much of South Africa. The color of your skin here often determines where you live. It also determines your quality of life. This map shows where jobs and opportunities are primarily concentrated in Cape Town. And this is where most of the city's black people live, in informal settlements called townships on the city's periphery.
People have to move by public transport for up to 3 hours a day, and they can't take care of their obligations in the community with the rest of the family because they're always working and they're always traveling.
Daily Mad News.
For decades, South Africa was under apartheid, a system that wrote segregation into law. A white minority controlled where non-white people could live, work, exist. Many were forced out of their homes. In 1994, a democratically elected government took power and ended apartheid. It was supposed to be a new beginning. But a lot of the country still looks like this. And that's because South Africa's legacy of racial division goes back centuries.
Daily Mad News.
In the 1600s, the Dutch took over the southern tip of Africa to supply ships with food along the trade route to Asia. 150 years later, Britain seized it and named it Cape Colony. Many Dutch colonists moved here, further inland, to escape British rule and continue exploiting enslaved people. Just like the Dutch, the British used Cape Colony as a strategic location for trade. It wasn't economically significant. But in the 1870s, that changed when the British started mining diamonds there.
Daily Mad News.
In 1820, there's a guy called Timothy Jones, and he proposed a settlement scheme relocating British settlers to South Africa to the House of Parliament. I'll show you the documents now. At branchcollective.org here, if you check out the Timothy John's 1820 settlement scheme to South Africa here. Oh yeah, let's have a read through. In other words, the 1820 settlers, as they came to be known, were to be situated within a region that had recently undergone ethnic cleansing, a former contact zone between colonial troops and local African groups, sides who have already engaged in a series of frontier wars. Do you hear that? Now, let's go deeper. To make matters more complicated, most of the new arrivals, while soon to be engaged in a monumental agrarian endeavor, were merely tradesmen, artisans, and mechanics from Britain's industrial towns and cities, some of whom passed themselves off as rural folk and sailed to South Africa with grand dreams of finding a natural paradise that will support them with little effort.
Daily Man News.
So it was the British decision to migrate British citizens, Britons, to South Africa during 1820. There's actually a website that still have the list of the initial people that went there.
Daily Man News.
If you go to 1820settlers.com, there's actually a database of most of the British citizens that went to South Africa at that time. There's actually like 38,000 entries of the people that went there. The marriage certificate, they still have a database that contains the original marriage certificate of the initial people that went to South Africa during that time. So there's actually a website that actually has the names of the initial 38,000 people that went there. So I beg your pardon, it was actually 38,000, almost 40,000 people.
Daily Man News.
So this is a copy of the South Africans Native Lands Act. Yeah. If you look at the section 2 of it, yeah. From and after the commencement of this act, no person other than a native shall purchase, hire, or in any other manner whatever acquire any land in a scheduled native area or enter into any agreement or transaction for the purchase, hire, or other acquisition, direct or indirect, of any such land or of any right thereto or interest therein or servitude thereover, except with the approval of the Governor General. So what this law actually prohibits is it enables everybody else except the native to own and purchase the land. That's basically the law the British passed to South Africans in 1913 that prohibit black people from owning land. Now let's get back to the video.
Daily Man News.
Racial inequality in Cape Colony was being reinforced by location. To keep it that way, the colonial government started writing segregation into law. The Native Lands Act of 1913 pushed black people into these areas, only 8% of South Africa's land, and restricted them from owning land everywhere else.
Doesn't it look like the same thing that's happening to Palestine right now? The land, take the natives away and put them in different. Doesn't it look like the map of Palestine?
Daily Man News.
Or relocated them to the edges of the major cities to work for white people. These laws began to shape the region. Cape Town's growth from the increased trade turned the port town into a major city. Many migrants from the rest of the colony and elsewhere moved here, to what was then the outskirts of Cape Town, where former enslaved people, merchants, artists, and immigrants were forming a neighborhood called District 6. As the city grew around District 6, so did the neighborhood.
Daily Man News.
Cecil John Rhodes, born 5th July 1853 and he died 26th of March 1902, was an English South African mining magnate and politician in South Africa, who served as Prime Minister of the Cape Colony from 1890 to 1896. A son of a vicar, Rhodes was born at Netwell House, Bishop Stortford, Hertfordshire. A sickly child, he was sent to South Africa by his family when he was 17 years old in the hope that the climate might improve his health. He entered the diamond trade at Kimberley in 1871. When he was 18, and with the funding from Rothschild and Co., began to systematically buy out and consolidate diamond mines. Over the next 2 decades, he gained a near-complete monopoly of the world diamond market. His company, De Beers, formed in 1888, retains its prominence into the 21st century.
Daily Mag News.
Rhodes entered the Cape Parliament at the age of 21 in 1881, and in 1890, he became Prime Minister. During his time as Prime Minister, Rhodes used his political power to expropriate land from black Africans through the Glenn Grey Act, while also tripling the wealth requirement for voting under the Franchise and Ballot Act, effectively barring black people from taking part in elections.
Daily Mag News.
In the colonial history of South Africa, the Glenn Grey Act was an 1894 act of the Parliament of the Cape Colony, instigated by the government of the Prime Minister Cecil John Rhodes. He established a system of individual rather than communal land tenure and created a labor tax to force Xhosa men into employment on commercial farms or into industry.
Daily Mag News.
The Franchise and Ballot Act 1892 was an act of the Cape Colony Parliament driven by Prime Minister Cecil Rhodes, which raised the property franchise qualification, thus disenfranchising a large proportion of the Cape's non-white voters and a number of poor white voters.
Daily Mag News.
For decades, District 6 was a thriving, integrated community.
We were a very cosmopolitan, you could say, family almost, because there were people from all different nationalities, from all different walks of life.
This was the statement, your child is my child.
But it wouldn't last. In 1934, Britain's legal hold in what was now the Union of South Africa officially ended. The remaining white minority, the descendants of Dutch colonists, took control.
Daily Mag News.
This guy right here is the head of the Boer community in South Africa, which is the descendants of the Dutch and European descendants that colonized South Africa from the 1600s. Now, you have to understand that South Africa has been under Western European rule for over 360 years. Yeah, since the first white people came there and captured the land, South Africa has been ruled for over 360 years. Now, these are the descendants of the colonizers here.
Yeah. But you can have Johannesburg. Is that Johannesburg?
Yeah.
Okay, I give it to you tonight.
One thing I've discovered since I've been looking back at the history of colonization in Africa is the idea of any random white guy can just go on the paper and draw a map there and say, this is mine now. You can have that now. You can have that now. I mean, what gives these people the right to do that?
Daily Mag News.
In 1950, the Population Registration Act officially classified people by race: white, colored, and native or black, and eventually Asian. Then they made laws saying where people could live. Around the country, black South Africans were moved into these areas, called homelands or Bantustans. Bantustans were rural areas and had underdeveloped economies. Many of them were in the areas Britain had already excluded from the railway economy, and where black land ownership had been restricted too. Black people were forced to carry passbooks that specified where they were allowed to work or travel to. In cities like Cape Town, the Group Areas Act moved the remaining non-whites into separate urban areas.
The most prime land and the land closest to high-valued property was allocated to white people.
In 1966, the government declared that District 6 was now a whites-only area. The residents of District 6 received removal letters like this one that said living there was illegal because they were not white. Bulldozers drove into District 6 and razed it to the ground. More than 60,000 people were forcibly removed from their homes. This kind of violence against non-white people was commonplace around the country. But after decades of pressure, both from within South Africa and abroad, apartheid rule finally came to an end. The new government lifted restrictions on where people could live. Millions of people who had been excluded from economic development for centuries migrated to major cities looking for basic services and economic opportunity.
So, when some people now ask, why is equality difficult in South Africa? Equality is difficult in South Africa for a lot of reasons. Okay, look at now the historical legacy now. Apartheid, that's even after the colonial era. There's another era called the apartheid era from 1948 to 1994, yeah? And which deeply created racial divides in education, employment, wealth, land ownership, and still that echoes still today.
You really do not understand.
Why?
We are not Africans from Africa. We are white people, the descendants of the British and the Irish and the French people and the Dutch people. If we allow black people or non-white people to become Boer people, then it will be the end of the existence of the Boer people, because in South Africa alone, we are only 3.5 million against 40 million black people.
Our next story is from South Africa. It's been 3 decades since South Africa abolished apartheid, a system of racially segregating black people from white people. The country got rid of it in the 1990s, but the spirit of apartheid is still alive in some places. One of them is Orania, a remote town in the country's north, often called the last outpost of apartheid. Why? Because Orania is a whites-only town. Black people cannot live or work here. Every job is reserved for the whites, every task performed by white people. And yet the residents of this town insist they're not racist. Here's a report.
Welcome to Orania, a remote farming town in South Africa's Northern Cape. It prints its own money, runs its own banks, has its own holidays and manages its own affairs. Sounds like the perfect township to relocate, right? Well, hold your horses. To enter Orania, you have to qualify on certain parameters. The foremost is the color of your skin. It has to be white, because Orania is a whites-only town. The uniqueness is too obvious to ignore. Wherever you go in this township, you will only find Afrikaners. White people with Dutch ancestry. They do all the work, from playing the piano at the church to reading out the Bible to believers, to running the kitchen at a restaurant. To even gardening at orchards. All jobs, big or small, are reserved for white people. But the residents of this town insist that they're not racist.
We are from Africa, that's why we call ourselves Afrikaners. We want to remain here. We also want to retain our identity. Now, to retain one's identity is not a racist impulse. We wanted to retain our identity against the English or the British imperialism also, and they're even whiter than we are.
Today, 60% of the mostly black population of Cape Town lives in these townships at the edge of the city. The thing is, Cape Town city center has land to develop, but because of its location, it's valuable. So it usually gets sold to private developers who build luxury apartments. Nearly $1 billion worth of them are going up by the coast. But right in the heart of Cape Town, by all the expensive developments. District 6 remains largely untouched.
Daily Mag News.
There's a real problem with violence and expressed in various different ways. And so for us, sitting in South Africa, looking at these 19,000 murders, looking at trying to get a sense of where it's taking place, the various complex factors that result into it, this growth in armed attacks, the gangs involved in cash and transit heists, and then suddenly there's this international tension on the murders of white farmers. It just sort of seems completely disproportionate. It's not that it isn't a problem. And of course, for the victims, it's terribly traumatic. But it's not the biggest challenge facing South Africa.
Is there any evidence for the claim that's often made that the farm attacks in particular are politically driven, that they're part of some organised campaign to drive the whites from the land?
There's no credible evidence that the attacks against white farmers is organised or politically driven. There is evidence that the attacks on white farmers in South Africa are largely driven by criminal intent, greed.
Daily Mag News.
South Africa and the US have been at loggerheads since Pretoria passed the expropriation law in January 2025. The legislation seeks to redress years of unequal land ownership by allowing the state to expropriate land for public purposes, including housing and infrastructure, if deemed in public interest. Landowners are particularly concerned about the law, which has divided South Africans on whether the expropriation law will really bring prosperity to South Africa. Some, particularly those on the political left, believe the law does not go far enough. However, the previous African National Congress government has been criticized for not efficiently using land it has already appropriated and for failing to make land available to blacks.
Daily Mag News.
These are burial sites right here. Burial sites. Over 1,000 of white farmers, and those cars are lined up to pay love on a Sunday morning. Each one of those white things you see is a cross, and there's approximately 1,000 of them. They're all white farmers, the family of white farmers. And those cars aren't driving, they're stopped there to pay respects to their family member who was killed. And it's a terrible sight. I've never seen anything like it. Both sides of the road you have crosses. Those people were all killed.
Have they told you where that is, Mr. President? No, I'd like to know where that is, because this I've never seen.
We know where that is.
I mean, it's in South Africa. That's where.
Daily Mag News.
This is the footage, yeah, that they are talking about. Let's have a look through, please.
Plaasmoeder is Afrikaans for farm murders. On a hillside in Limpopo province, a private landowner has planted more than 2,000 crosses. Each one represents an individual murdered in a farm attack since 1994. 75 more crosses were added last year, but that figure is controversial. The nation's biggest commercial farmers' union claims there were only 47 farm murders last year, the lowest number in nearly 20 years.
Daily Mag News.
So, according to Sky News, Donald Trump put his South African counterpart Cyril Ramaphosa on the spot with lists of claims and video clips when the pair met in the Oval Office on Wednesday. But multiple pieces of evidence that President Trump used to support his claims are inaccurate. One video, the White House played some lines of white crosses along a road. Alongside a road. Mr. Trump told President Ramaphosa that the footage showed burial sites of more than 1,000 white farmers in South Africa.
Daily Mag News.
Video that was shown to Donald Trump in the White House in 2025. But according to evidence, the video shown by Donald Trump originated from a YouTube video from 2020. Credits the bulletin. So this is the YouTube video for 2020. This is a clip of it. But this is the original road. Google Maps satellite imagery from 2020 shows the crosses pictured in 2020 have been removed. Have you seen it there?
Daily Man News.
If you see what I'm talking about now, so we can see now that this place is not actually a burial ground. It's a project that was done by one of the so-called private landowners. Now, let's go back into this history. For one private landowner to have this amount of land to do this kind of project, let's think for example, how much land does one person have to make this kind of project? How much land does they have to undergo this kind of project? But Donald Trump thinks it's a burial ground, but it's not a burial ground. It's a project that was created by someone in memorial of all the white farmers. Now, what I'm trying to say is if one family, one person has this much land from South Africa to do this, that even the president doesn't even know where this is. Just think about it for a second.
Daily Man News.
Privately owned land in South Africa, yeah? 37 million hectares. That's the total number of land in South Africa. 37 million hectares is the total number of land in South Africa. Yes, 37 million hectares. Black people, which are the black citizens of South Africa, they only own 4% of that. 4% of the 37 million hectares. White settlers owns 72% of 37 million hectares is owned by white people. Other nationalities that are not black South Africans own 24% of South African land. Take that in for a second.
Daily Man News.
See, Afrikaners here, including the broad community here, they have a significant influence in South Africa's economy, especially when it comes to luxury goods, media, retail, tourism, and finance. And many of these countries' richest white individuals, they all have colonial backgrounds. For example, let's go through them.
Daily Man News.
This guy is one of the richest men in South Africa. Most of his wealth is through inheritance from colonial lands and businesses, mines, and all that kind of stuff. Yeah. Right now, he himself has a personal ranch of 25,000 acres of land.
Daily Man News.
Nicky Oppenheimer is one of the richest billionaires in South Africa. His family, the wealth of his family are all from colonial wealth. Yeah. The Oppenheimers control two of Africa's richest companies, the Anglo-American Corporation and De Beers, and own 2.4 million acres of farmland in Zimbabwe, approximately the size of Belgium.
Daily Man News.
The Oppenheimers, one family, the Oppenheimers, they own 2.4 million acres of African land. That's one family. Just to show you how they divide this land among themselves. Now, let's go deeper into what this guy owns.
Daily Man News.
Land portfolios we're going through here. In South Africa, the Swallow Kalahari Reserve, a private game reserve in the Northern Cape, is owned and operated by the Oppenheimer family. It covers over 100,000 hectares. Take that in for a second.
Daily Man News.
Now, the same family, let's go to Zimbabwe. The Oppenheimers own the 65,000 hectare Shangani Ranch. In the past, the Zimbabwe government had targeted large portions of the family's land for land redistribution, leading to disputes and negotiations.
Daily Man News.
That climate is heating up, the white farmers say. And one cause is the rise of a new political party, the Economic Freedom Fighters, or EFF. I've come to one of their rallies in Northwest Province, where the mood to me seems far from hostile.
You have to understand that the Gen Zs are not having it no more. The Gen Zs and the Generation Alphas, they're not having it no more. They're thinking, nah, bro, you've taken our land for 200 years. You've promised to give us something back for over 40 years. We're not having it back, so we're going to take laws into our own hands. And I think that's what driven the political party like the EFF to start. And this is where we are now in 2025.
Job, opportunities for varsity, and for everything. I love EFF with my whole life.
Daily News. This is the statistical graph of the labor force participation in South Africa from 2021 to 2023, the last quarter of 2023. Now, the group and classified by races here. Now, the blue shows the black African, black shows the colored, which is classified as the mixed race people. The Indian and the Asian is the gray one, and the white people is the red one. Now, if you look through this graph properly, you can see that the indigenous black South African are the lowest in the labor market. They're actually the lowest in the labor market. They are the most populous people there according to population, yeah? But look at it there. They're the lowest in the labor market. This is the graduate graph from 1975 to 2015, yeah? Black and colored, you see? You see where they are? Right now, there's even less than 5%. If you see over there. And if you see where the white people are, and the Asian and races, that's for black South African in their country. This is the prospect. That the number of black people attaining a degree in South Africa, a bachelor's degree, is less than 5%. Daily News.
The EFF's self-styled commander-in-chief is Julius Malema, a former leader of the ruling African National Congress's Youth League.
We are not going to accept that the poor of the poor must be excluded from education because they do not have money.
Expelled from the ANC in 2012, he started his own rival party and promises the world to his followers.
Education is a right. All of us must have access to education.
He sets race against race with a recklessness that shocks the political establishment. At this rally, he takes aim at the Indian middle class.
Majority of Indians hate Africans. Majority of Indians are racist.
But his favorite target is the white landowner. He urges his followers to take back what was stolen from them.
The white minority which took our land by force. You must say enough is enough. We are taking the future into our own hands.
If this was in England, won't British people do the same thing? Won't they want to take the land back? It's just a question that I'm asking. Daily News.
At the end of almost every speech, he sings an old ANC war song, Kill the Boer, although that particular phrase has been banned as hate speech.
Shoot to kill, kill our, shoot to kill, Yamaza, pa, 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 tension. There's nothing you can do, there's nothing this parliament can do. With or without you, people are going to occupy land.
It was the EFF in Parliament who proposed a motion in favour of expropriating land without compensation, a move that the ANC, led by new state president Cyril Ramaphosa, had little choice but to support.
Honourable Ntlangwini, Honourable Gadi, Honourable Mhlongo.
So far, the ANC has not seized any farmland without paying market price.
Daily News.
Hours drive away from Deep Sloot, the burghers of Fockville gather each Sunday to pray for forgiveness and survival. For more than a century, the Dutch Reformed Church of South Africa provided the theological bedrock upon which apartheid was built. God created separate races, it told its flock, and separate they should stay. Like his father before him, Johan is a respected elder of the church. His roots here are generations deep. It's just a few weeks since his parents' murder. He'll get the harvest in, he says, and then decide what to do. It won't be easy.
If you've been on the farm for 40 years, 2 generations, and you've put a lot of hard work, blood, sweat, tears into the farm, you just don't just pack up and leave. I will more than be willing to stay. But at this point, everything is just going south.
So if it goes on like that?
What future are there for my children? There's no future here.
Breng mij terug naar jouw Transvaal, daar waar mijn Sari woont.
Look at the farmland that belongs to one family. Yeah? Look how vast that land is. That one family have been taken over and enjoying for generations.
As for Nelson Mandela, the man credited with ending apartheid, the people of Orania don't really hold him in high regard.
I don't think that I can see him as a hero because he's part of a whole package. Mandela is part of a whole package, and as Mandela, all the other leaders within the ANC make a contribution to create some policy that is, from our viewpoint, not necessarily for the best of this country.
Yes. This township is legal as per South Africa's constitution. An article defends its right to self-determination. But Orania's ambitions could soon spell trouble. Because the people here say their next goal is the creation of an Afrikaner republic, a white-only autonomous region within South Africa.
If this is happening in England right now, do you think the English people allow it? No, they wouldn't. And that's the reason why I took my time to do a well-deserved research on this topic. Because when we see in the news yesterday when Donald Trump was claiming that white genocide is taking place, we have to actually go deeper into these roots. Now the question I would like to ask you guys is black South Africans, are they entitled to self-determination? Do they have the right to claim back their ancestral lands? Me personally, I think the new South African land reform, I think is a process towards justice. It's a process towards justice, not racial extermination. And the reason why is if you understand the complex history of how South African lands were being taken in the first place, you know that this is just the first step to the process of justice. And I also think that the whole concept of white genocide, I think is total garbage, it's a myth, and it needs to be thrown to the rubbish bin of history, because South African land reform is about addressing historical injustice and land grab that happened during colonial times, and restoring rights to those who are dispossessed. That's what I think. If you like what I do, make sure you like, share, comment, and subscribe to the Daily Madness. Until the next episode, where I'm going to be going deeper into Palestine. Whoa! Until I see you again in the next episode of the Daily Madness. It's your boy FOB. I'm out. Daily Madness. Daily Madness. My news. Daily Madness.